If, therefore, thine eye be single, the whole body shall be full of light. That was from Matthew. When mind soars in pursuit of the things conceived in space, it pursues emptiness. But when man dives deep within himself, he experiences the fullness of existence. Meher Baba. We are only that. That is, exist only in the world of relativity. The vanity of man jibes at that statement. Man is accustomed to think himself important. His ego, he likes to think, holds the attention of superhuman powers. Gods and demons carefully watch his acts and thoughts, applauding some and punishing others. In himself, man has built a sub-office of the invisible tribunal of divine judges, and there he distributes praise and blame. So says Alexandra David Neal in the Secret Oral Teachings. Allegiance to the void implies denial of its voidness. The more you talk about it, the more you think about it, the further from it you go. Stop talking, stop thinking, and there is nothing you will not understand. Return to the root, and you will find the meaning. Pursue the light, and you lose its source. Look inward, and in a flash, you will conquer the apparent and the void. All come from mistaken views. There is no need to seek truth. Only stop having views. So says Seng San. When the mind perceives an object, it is transformed into the shape of that object. So the mind which thinks of the divinity, which it worships, the Ishta Devata, is at length, through continued devotion, transformed into the likeness of that Devata. By allowing the Devata, the God, to occupy the mind for long, it becomes as pure as the Devata. This is the fundamental principle of tantric sadhana, or religious practice. There are two views which are statements of dualism, or non-dualism is the first, advaitism, and dualism, dvaitism. When you realize that all talking and all thinking is dualistic, because you got to think about something and talk to somebody, you realize that, and when you realize that what we seek is non-dualistic, we understand the words of Teng San says, stop talking, stop thinking, and just be. It's an interesting question of what we're doing here tonight, why we're here. More words? I guess we have to be here until we don't have to be here anymore. That's the only way I can figure it. I haven't the remotest idea why we're here. I mean, I can tell you game within game within game within game, but I don't think it has anything to do with it. I just turn out to be here and you turn out to be here. Well, is by our being here, are we getting deeper into a trap? Non-dualist said we would be. He said, stop talking about it and just be it. And what the dualist says is you use the crutch until you don't need it anymore. Ramana Maharshi says, you use a stick to stir the funeral pyre, knowing full well that at the end you'll throw the stick into the fire too. Certainly must be apparent to all of us that this is a sort of a middle position we're in. But how can we use this gathering as an exercise in order to help ourselves on the way? Because there's nothing else to do anyway but become enlightened. We can retain a degree of consciousness throughout this whole experience in which we see it as an experience instead of collecting an experience. Wow, I got so high the other night. Man, whew. That's like a thing out there. Let's just all be here and dig this whole drama unfold. I was trying to figure out, driving up Bayshore, what about holy men trips, because it's very heavy. I was in Los Angeles the other night, and the scene got very far out. And at the end of the evening, in this beautiful Unitarian church, there were several hundred people standing there for eternity. We were all just zonked. And people would come up to touch my feet. Now, I go through a number of trips about that, as you might well imagine. The first time it happened to me in India, when I walked around, see, when you take on a certain garb of the dhoti and so on, walk barefoot with, you're a sadhu, and then it is of spiritual merit to grustas or householders to honor a sadhu, to feed him or to touch his feet or something like that. And in India, there are 10 million sadhus who are sort of like dropouts. They're dropouts specifically for the purpose of serving God. Now, within such a collection of people, obviously many of them are in it because it's an easy trip. And there's a lot of impurity, obviously. But it is a major spiritual active force in a country. And it's just what the very mobile young monks on the path are doing in America. They're becoming these spiritual uplifters that are just going from place to place, being straight, being here. You see them thumbing everywhere around the country, and they're like, they're little short of being what Maya Baba dealt with as mosts. Those God intoxicants, you'd find one sitting in a garbage dump somewhere. He'd been sitting there for 20 years, and he just sort of kept the spiritual scene in his community cool. That was his trip. And in a way, you see these kind of seeds of spirit just sort of drifting around, light going hither and yon. Now, when it first happened in India that somebody touched my feet, I got very uncomfortable because I felt like as I've said before, an overage hippie, explorer, dilettante, whatever else you might call me. But I didn't feel like a holy man. And Bhagwan Das, my guru brother, who's very, very far out guy, he's the one from Laguna Beach. He said, well, when they do that, he's my teacher, one of my teachers there. He's 23 or 4. He said, well, when they do that to you, you just honor them in your heart. You touch their feet in your heart, because you can't do it there because that's not the way sadhus do the thing. Okay, so I started to do that. And the other night when it started to happen again in America, because it was, people understand that prana is emitted from high spiritual beings, and people go through a trip. I've gotten so high being around you, you must be really high, so I'll come and touch your feet and get prana, or I want to honor you, or I love you, or whatever it is. And I dug after a while that was like a failure on my part. Because if the thing really was working, you would turn around and touch each other's feet, or honor each other. In other words, everybody would see that it's us, and that we wouldn't start a new game of holy man. And after a number of people had done this, I was just so zonked I could hardly move, because what happens is when they do that to you, they feed in all their love and energy, and it just takes you out. I mean, it's like a gift of so much prana. And I was just going out and out and out and out. I was once in a temple in Nainital, in India, and I was sitting in meditation, and it was looking out over a valley in the Himalayas. It was very beautiful, and I was quite centered. And I was not very much in my body, and I suddenly experienced these hands. My eyes were closed. I suddenly experienced these hands massaging my arms and my legs. Very strong hands. And of course, the thing happening to me brought me down to another state, because I couldn't, I wasn't harmonious with the model I had of the world, that people come up and rub your legs. And I opened my eyes just a trifle. I came down. And there were this elderly couple who had come to pay homage at the temple, and they saw this sadhu meditating, and so they came up to do this thing, which was a thing to help me with my work. And of course, it got me so high because of the purity with which they did it. Because there was no hustle, it was so pure. And so there's a sequel to that story, a strange one, but the other side of the coin, the yin-yang of it all, that on the train from Bareilly to Delhi, a night train, Bhagwan Das and I had third-class seats, or fourth, whatever the lowest class is, where you go with your knees up to your chin, and there are 100 people in a room about this big, and everybody's grooving, all the muscles and bones, and it's just a mass of, The train goes about 18 miles an hour for 10 hours. And you might as well give in. See, it's the surrender to humanity, because if you fight India, it's horrible, And the minute you surrender to the Divine Mother, it's, oh, wow, she just, And she is the mother. She's really the mother. And so I was looking forward to this scene, because I know how I have to go through all my trips about everything before I can surrender into that. But I know it demands it finally. It's a very unrelenting teacher. And this baggage man came along and he said, sadhus, American sadhus, from America, I answered. He said, sit in carriage. Come. I run baggage cars. I have a whole empty baggage car. I'll give just you. Wow, that's pretty far. Sure, man. So we go, and it's a baggage car. It's got places to put bags, but there's a place you can sort of stretch out on the floorboards. It's sort of like that. And he says, I won't let anybody in. When I want, come in and visit, I'll knock. Closes the door, and he says, all the freight's in the next car. And he goes away, and the train starts. And after a while, his knock, and we let him in, and he says, oh, sadhus, I am so honored to have you here. And I was starting on my trip again, like the people up in the temple. And I'm sitting there, and I'm in the lotus position, and I'm just sort of going with the train and going out on the train, on the wheels and so on. And I feel these hands on my legs massaging. And I thought, oh, wow, I'm going to get this trip again. This is like so much, And I really settle into it. See, Then the hands keep going higher and higher and higher and higher and higher until I think, oh, wow, a thought form enters my head. So all I did was I just created a field in which that thought form didn't exist. I just became a statue. And it really turns you off to make it with a statue. It just gives nothing at all. There's just no one home. So he immediately finished. He lost interest and he said, "I can't keep this place for just you people. I've got to let many people in." And then he let in, all of us again. So this happened in Los Angeles. See, there's this feet-touching business, and I thought, well, now, this is getting a little out of hand, because I don't think we can handle all that, And I sat there, it was so beautiful, and it was pure, but it was scary because of the impurity of my thoughts. Finally, I guess I got to my point, and I stood up and I said, "Well, everybody, that's showbiz." So the latest report I got yesterday was they heard somebody say, "Oh, Alpert, he's that stand-up Jewish comic." Actually, I'm a sit-down one. Why I've become a holy man is because there's nothing else to do. And why I come on like a holy man, in other words, why I play the holy man game. Being a holy man and playing the holy man game are quite different. Most of everybody here is a holy man, but not everybody's playing the holy man game. It's a game with rules and rituals and, very stylized thing. It's like a barber or a policeman or a holy man. But the reason I play it is very much because I understand the only thing I can do is work on myself. That's the only thing I can do either for my enlightenment or for the enlightenment of any other being in form, is to work on my own consciousness. And I dig that when I'm around a certain kind of consciousness, that I'm helped greatly. I'm opened up a great deal. And that consciousness is called in India, in Sanskrit, it's called satsang, and in Buddhism it's called sangha. In Buddhism you take you make the three statements. Buddham saranam gacchami, Dharmam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in a being who is enlightened. Somebody makes it. And in Buddha consciousness. I take refuge in the Dharma, meaning the law or the way or the process, the method. The karma, the sanskaras, that's all Dharma. The laws under which you're functioning in nature and all the astral and causal planes that keep you being what you're being at this moment. That's your Dharma. And I take refuge in the Sangha, or the community of monks who are on the path. Now, there is a stage in one's development, in one's opening, where you are still using methods. And one of the methods, this is the time when the tree is very young, as Ramakrishna says, and it's the time when you're surrounded by a fence to keep it from being broken down. And that's the time when you surround yourself with beings who understand what you understand. That's Sangha, Satsang. So I dug that by being a holy man, in the game sense, that the only people that would hang out with me would be people who were digging to be around holy men, which is a self-selecting factor. I mean, psychiatrists, for the most part, won't be around holy men. because they'll say they're nuts and they don't hang out around psychotics. Government officials, for the most part, won't hang out with holy men. Up-and-coming young businessmen won't hang out with holy men. If you read one of the highest books that's ever been written, The Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, it's a big, fat book. There was a guy by the name of M who was a devotee of Ramakrishna's, and he had a phenomenal memory. And every day he just dedicated years of his life to copying down everything that was said at these darshans where Ramakrishna hung out. And you watch businessmen come to Ramakrishna trying to hold on to their businessman-ness. You know, they corner on the energy market on the physical plane. And you'd see people from every walk of life, and you'd see phony holy men coming to Ramakrishna, and he was really doing them in, lovingly. The other day I was staying with Laura Huxley down in Los Angeles, and Laura said to me, everything you're doing sounds so beautiful, but what about all the people that are really lost? I mean, what are you doing for anybody like that? After all, everybody that comes to have darshan is somebody who's come to have darshan. That already is a self-selecting factor. And I said, well, as far as I understand light, it just spreads. And that each of us just emits whatever light we have, and it just keeps spreading through everybody it touches all the time. And everything that goes out in waves from each of us, those high beings who are here, who are feeding energy into me, that energy is coming out again for us. We're taking it out, we're taking it out, we're taking it out, and people we will be meeting a month from tonight will be receiving the light that we are sharing at this moment. The purification just goes out like ripples on a lake. And I thought to myself, if I get highest when I'm alone, which is true, when I do the purest work, why am I sitting with other people? Why am I seeking this? Why am I creating? What kind of desires are creating this phenomenon? Since your desires are creating me, as you see me, you might see me as a hippie playing a role, you might see me as a holy man, you might see me as old Dick Alpert, you might see me as Ram Dass, you might see me as somebody who's been to India, you might see me as another cat who's laying out a line, like, who knows? That's your desires. But for my desires, that's all this. I thought, why aren't I sitting in the temple in the Himalayas? What am I doing here? I can sit in the temple in the Himalayas, there's nothing keeping me. Just go to the Himalayas and sit in the temple. And then I remembered sitting in the temple in the Himalayas. And I sat in the temple in the Himalayas, and the way I would do it is in the mornings, I would meditate to calm my mind down. I'd sit, I'd do all my asanas and my pranayama. First you go and you take an ice cold bath in the river, 4:30 in the morning in the dark. Chanting, that's far out. And you go to the toilet and you do the whole thing, and then you come in and you light your incense and your candle at the puja table, and you do your puja. And then you meditate and you do breathing, pranayama, and then you do asanas, body, hatha yoga. Then tea, or whatever you had. That was my addiction, was tea. Then I'd sit by the river as the sun came up and look out, and then I would start to meditate. And when I'd meditate, I would do usually this method that I've talked about a lot, the method enunciated by the southern Buddhists, the Theravadins, the Hinayanas. See, if you went to certain monasteries, you say, well, man, this is all groovy here, but this is too much of a scene. I'm going to a monastery. So you're now transported to, say, Ceylon or someplace like that, and you knock on the door of a monastery, and you say, I'd like to be enlightened. And they say, come this way. And you think, aha, I'm in. Really, I'm in. I got one... when we got to Sarnath, that's where Buddha delivered his first sermon at the Deer Park. We were staying usually at hostels or at church temples. And we got to Sarnath, and there was a Tibetan Buddhist temple and a Jain temple, and there's the Indian Mahabodhi Society, and they have a hostel, but you got to pay 50 cents a night. And then there was a Chinese Buddhist temple that was very remote feeling, awesomely remote. So the Tibetan temple was full because the Dalai Lama was coming because they were going to consecrate a new school. The Jain temple didn't like Westerners because they had a lot of trouble and they called everybody hippies. The Mahabodhi Society charged. So we sat in the chai wala, the chai stand, the tea stand, figuring out what to do next. And my guru brother said, well, go get us into the Chinese Buddhist temple. I said, but they don't take Westerners. He said, well, go do it. So he never asked me to do anything. He always fed me and took care of me. So I figured if he wants me to do it, I guess I do it. So I walked into this very Chinese inner garden place in the temple. Awesome, huge sitting stone Buddha in the temple, and that's practically all there is, and it's a huge building as high as this, and there's nothing else practically in the room. There's two Buddhas back to back, actually, little one behind. And I found a man washing the floor, and I said to him, I and another American would like to stay here to study. And he says, he didn't understand, come in this way. And he led me into a room, so you stay here. And pretty soon as I sat there, these monks started to drift into the room. They smiled, and I smiled, till there were about 8 or 9 of them. People, monks and others from the temple. And there was a big fan going around. And then this old man monk came in, and he sat down, and he motioned for a young interpreter. He says, what does he want? So I said, well, this other fellow and I are traveling, and we're making a religious pilgrimage, and we'd like to study for 2 weeks, and we'd like to stay at your temple. And he looked at me, and they looked, and I didn't know what was going to happen next. And he burst out laughing. And then he got up and walked out. And then all the other 9 monks got up and walked out, and I was left there alone. I thought, well, what do you suppose just happened? I can't. I don't know what just happened. And then a fellow came along. He said, come this way. Took me to a room, opened it, said, this is the beds, this is the bathroom, and he gave me the key, and that was it. I'll tell you just another smidgen of that part of the drama, because it was so beautiful. About the middle of the night, around 3 in the morning, I was sort of in a sleep, half meditation, half sleep state, and I started to hear this awesome chanting. So I went to the door, and I opened the door, and the sky was beautiful, the moon was full, and it was all like all old Chinese-type trees. And a pagoda-style roofs and all with a moon on it. And there was this chanting that was coming from somewhere else. And I snuck along by the temple till I came to the temple door, and I realized it was coming from inside the temple, and there was a candle lit in the temple. And I didn't dare look in the temple because it seemed like it was none of my business. I hadn't been invited in, and maybe this was some ceremony, and they didn't tell me about anything. So I just sort of sat down outside to, tune in on it. And it went on, and I assumed they've got many more people living here than I thought. They must have 30, 40 people here. And after about 2 hours of this absolutely beautiful chanting coming from all different spaces and so on, it stopped, and out walked a little old man. And I followed him, and there was a gate in the front of the temple that was locked. It was locked until 7 in the morning. And the gate was very far out because it had the swastika on it, which is the, But when you look at it from one side, and you're standing there holding bars, looking through a swastika, it takes you on an interesting side trip. And he walked up to this huge 8-foot gate. He must have been well into his middle 60s. And I thought we'd just stand there together till the gate opened. And he just climbed over the gate and walked away.